Hey everybody, good morning or good afternoon, I guess at this point. Welcome to our webinar today. This is exciting. It is Native Tree Week with Plant Nova Natives. And yeah, so we're excited to offer you guys a class all about native trees. So Michael Fahey is back with us today to discuss some of his favorites. So I am going to take just a few minutes, as always, to go over some notes for people who are new. If you have attended these classes before, of course, welcome back. And as always, just bear with me for the next minute or two. For those of you who have not attended one of our online classes before, welcome. We are so glad you're here today. This is a Zoom webinar format, so we can't actually speak to you during the class. If you have any questions, you will send those into the Q&A box, and we'll be watching that so that Michael can take questions that way. If you have any issues during the class, please feel free to send me a chat. I can help you out as much as possible that way. We are recording today, so we will have a recording of this class available probably tomorrow. They're usually about 24 hours before they're ready to go. And we'll be sending out a coupon following that class. All of that goes out by email, so just keep an eye out for that. I think that's about it. So quick introduction for Michael. I'll let him tell a little more about what he does, but he primarily works at our Fair Oaks store with our trees and shrubs. He's an arborist. And Michael, I know you can probably go over a little bit about what you do. So I'm going to let you take over and get the class started.
Thanks, Sally. Thanks so much. And thanks for having me. I feel absolutely flattered, humbled, and honored to be the one to kick off Native Tree Week with everybody. Woohoo! Congratulations. Here we are, Native Tree Week. All right. Yeah, as Sally mentioned, I work at the Fair Oaks location primarily. I do bounce around to the other stores as well. But this is my home base. And I'm involved in our plant purchasing process. You know, primarily the tree side of the plant inventory management. So always happy to help with any questions anybody has regarding anything. And this week, especially native trees. I am sporting my Go Native sticker here. So everybody make sure you pop into one of the 3 stores at some point today or anytime this week and grab your Go Native sticker. And yeah, thanks again for having me. I'm super excited to be talking native trees with you guys. Actually, I'm a little sweaty. I was just trying to dry off a little bit because I was down back involved with a customer. We were talking about native trees. They're looking to plant a few on the wood line of their property, and time got a little away from me, as it can when we're talking about subjects we're so into. So without further ado, congratulations. Here we are, Native Tree Week. Welcome, everybody. Sally, we good? You can see my screen okay?
Yep, you're all set.
Awesome. All right. So for those of you who don't know me personally, I was born and raised in Northern Virginia, never left, never planned to, and believe firmly that Northern Virginia is the greatest place on earth to call home base. So when it comes to natives here, trees, plants, anything, I really, just growing up as a kid, was very fond of our local forests and ecosystems, and every chance I could get, I was out in the woods and running around and exploring and asking, what is this and why is this? And so I really am super, super honored to be the one to be able to speak with you guys on native trees. And I'm thrilled to entertain any questions or anything anyone might have after the fact. I have very strong opinions, as people might mention. So I'd be completely remiss if I didn't kick it off with the concept of the right tree in the right place for the right function. Whether you're planting an ornamental or a native, you always want to make sure you're considering the right place for that tree. And this is a very good, quick illustration, not my illustration, but I think this says it. You know, do you want a tree that's going to be an overstory canopy tree, something that's going to tower above the home and provide shade and help, you know, with energy conservation? Or are you looking for something that's a little bit smaller and ornamental that's going to be, you know, potentially underneath power lines or another height restriction, or, you know, something in the middle ground that's going to be a front yard type specimen tree that you could hang a swing from in the future? With regards to this presentation, I really wanted to kind of get into the different sizes because I think that's a very relevant topic for people. So I wanted to first hit on overstory canopy trees. So Quercus, I thought was quite appropriate to kick off the week with. This is an image of your national tree, Quercus Alba, which is the top of the list there, white oak. You know, you can't say enough for what oaks do for the local ecology and wherever they are. Everything that they provide for wildlife and for the environment is just, it's unspeakable. You know, you look at the size of this tree in relation to the surrounding forest line, and you realize what a majestic tree this is. What great photosynthetic surface area it has with its foliage. What impressive oxygen it's creating, and then what an impressive amount of carbon it's sequestering in its root system in the soil. You know, I listed a few here. Going in order, the botanical names you can obviously read, but that's the first is white oak, then swamp white oak, scarlet oak, bur oak, which is one of my favorites, Quercus macrocarpa. Bur oak is going to have that big, majestic white oak, you know, field oak feel to it, really corky bark, and they're incredibly durable with regards to pollution tolerance and soil compaction. And an absolutely fantastic acorn that they produce for the wildlife. Then you've got Quercus palustris, which is pin oak, then Phalos willow oak, and finally Quercus rubra, which is our northern red oak. Just absolutely incredible diversity just amongst those trees. We're talking one genus here, oak. And I'm sorry, I'm going to head back to that for 1 second here. I thought I wrote it down. One of the things that, and I believe Doug Tallamy was here in Northern Virginia over the weekend speaking. I've seen him numerous times. If you haven't read his book, I encourage you to check it out, Bringing Nature to Your Home or Bringing Nature Home. I can't remember exactly what the title is, but he references a list of tree species in that book. And at one point he had put out a guide, and oak, again, white oak's our national tree, but oaks alone support over 500 different species of Lepidoptera, which are moths and butterflies. So to think the number of insects beyond just moths and butterflies that they're providing a food source for, and then to think about the mammals that they provide a food source for is just absolutely overwhelming. I believe it was 534 species of moths and butterflies that he actually cataloged on oaks. So there's that number right there. It is 500 species of Lepidoptera supported. So that's typically, you know, again, he was really recording insects, being an entomology guy. Obviously, he's a little bit of all wildlife guy, but you know, here's an illustration. These are, you know, this is just in my neighborhood, in my mother's neighborhood, the yellow-rumped warbler. I watched that bird in early spring. Obviously, this is a willow oak that bird's perched on. I watched that bird go from branch to branch, pulling the bud scales off of the vegetative buds that had already opened. As you can see, the new leaves emerging. I watched that bird, which we know typically as an insect eater. I watched that yellow-rumped warbler pulling the old bud scales off of those vegetative buds that had broken, and then individual grains of pollen from the flowers on that oak and feeding on them. I watched it for probably about 45 minutes to an hour from my mother's back porch. Like I said, that's the willow oak in her backyard. And then my neighborhood, I feel so very fortunate when it was developed. I live in Centerville. They did a fantastic job of landscaping and lining the community with native trees of all sorts. It's an incredibly diverse native community. But you know, again, here's a squirrel really getting into it with an acorn, which is happening pretty hot and heavy right now. Platanus. So our native sycamores. And again, I'm a big wildlife guy. A lot of the photography in here is mine. And I like to reference some of my imagery because I think it really brings to light all of the different native species that really benefit from these trees. And it's not all of the same. So I have an image there of the size of the nut. You know, in our native forests, it's imperative that we take into consideration the parts of the trees that are benefiting the wildlife, and then you know, the amount of benefit that the wildlife receives. So these owls from this spring, well, they were living in this sycamore. This was where their mother and father chose to have their nest. They hatched out in the cavity in the sycamore. I watched them from the time that the mother and father had paired and laid eggs till the point that this was this past summer, when they had become, you know, young juveniles and are now starting to test the waters of going off on their own. At this point, they were still with mom and dad, but this is a tree they've called home. This is a massive, massive sycamore. This is not a young tree. You know, it really takes old overstory canopy sized trees to be able to provide that kind of home for a species like barred owl. But, you know, they've called this tree home now for the better portion of a year, and they're going to call this tree home for probably another 9 months or so before they really fledge and start their own families. And you look at the size of the nut that this tree produces, and then you think about a massive tree like this, and how many of those nuts does it produce? And what does that bring to the table for the wildlife in that local ecosystem? And then think about how many sycamores like this there are along the stream bank or the river or wherever you may be, and how much food that really provides. Sweet gum, again, more than just providing a rainy shelter for one of my favorite mammals, black bears, but sweet gum is something I think a lot of people may overlook. And you know, I kind of get a little jaded on the topic of trash trees. I really don't like to touch on the subject of messiness from a tree too much, because I believe firmly that everything has something. No matter what you plant, you could nitpick any part of that tree and then claim it messy. And I think if we really start getting into that, I think you get to a point where now you don't want to plant anything for the sake of keeping things clean. And I'm just not that sterile of a person. You know, sweet gum, similarly to your oaks, produces an incredibly beneficial flower to the wildlife, which is in this picture here above the hanging fruit. You know, the flower produces a lot of nectar for a lot of insects, again, moths and butterflies specifically. I've seen bees on the flowers, you know, in the early spring. Obviously, that's when they're blooming, leaves are just emerging. And then the seed, you know, the sweet gum seed, similarly, you can watch those seeds when they hit the ground, and every bit of wildlife that lives in this area is going to those promptly and trying to break them and shake them and pull the seeds out of them. It's a very high protein source, you know, with just a little tiny bit of seeds that are in there. And then I include the fall color image here, not just because we're entering autumn and it feels festive, but, you know, this is a characteristic to me that can really drive this tree home for a lot of people in this area that are looking for, you know, yes, we'd like to plant a native tree, but we still want some strong ornamental features out of this tree. Well, sweet gum, as we all know, has one of the most impressive, if not the most impressive fall color of anything you could possibly plant as a larger, more mature hardwood tree. I know I grew up with 2 sweet gums in my father's yard when I was a kid, and those were just absolutely my favorite trees in the world. And still they're there today, and they're big and massive and thriving. You know, not to mention the durability of the tree. Again, this is one that has an incredible pollution tolerance, is a good urban environment tree, and the wood is extremely durable, which, especially when we start getting heavier, wetter snowfalls, you know, if you look back to 2010, even some of the hardest woods in the forest were breaking under heavy, wet snow loads when we had the snowmageddon in this area. You know, and that again, that's not a common occurrence, but it seems every 5 years or so we're due for a big, heavy, wet snow like that, and it's something to take into consideration if you're planting a big front yard tree or something near the home, and you are trying to get some canopy coverage. You do want to plant something beneficial for the wildlife. What are some trees that might work in that type scenario? So that is a great segue to this. This is Nissa is black gum. Debatably, and probably not debatably, I think it's hands down our most durable toughest wood in our native mesic forests here. So black gum is an incredible tree. It has really, really caught a lot of attention lately. You're talking about great benefit for wildlife from the flowers. You've got incredible benefit from the fruit as well. As I mentioned already, the durability. And then here's your fall color. You know, this is a small, rounded, glossy green leaf in spring and summer. Certainly some of the new growth will produce some good color as well. But once we get into the heat of summer, it's really set into its dark jade green color. This is its fall display. And actually the larger picture here is an image from our property here at the Fair Oaks location. This is our tree that's in the parking lot. It's actually up behind our sod bed where the loading dock is. And it's in a gravel area that is fenced in, and we kind of keep backstock annual racks there. But what's really impressive to me is this tree has continued to thrive in that environment. It is not an ideal environment for a tree, and it has not missed a beat. I mean, this tree is just absolutely one of the most durable trees I have ever seen. Every year, it seems to continue to put out the same amount of new growth. The tree has never shown any signs of stress. It's absolutely fabulous. And it's just now, if you visit the store to grab your Go Native stickers, it is just now starting to show some signs of going into fall color, which is really exciting to me. I don't know about you guys, but this is absolutely my favorite time of year here in Northern Virginia. Ulmus. So Ulmus is your great, majestic American elm. That's what's pictured here. This is an image that, and I'm going to click one more. Oh, I've gone a little too far. This image is, I took this, if you can see all of the lower trees growing here, this is actually one of our tree growers' property. This is in the mountains, and this is down in the valley. And off in the distance, this is actually a river basin. Off in the distance behind the forest line that's in the background behind the elm here is where the river runs through. And there was about 100 years ago, the story goes that there was a 100-year flood event, and that river came up and flooded this entire valley from mountain to mountain. And this is the only tree that survived that 100-year flood event, which I think is just, it leaves me completely speechless to think that this tree has been alive that long, but you can tell with the beautiful canopy spread and how mature it is. But it's just, it speaks volumes of the durability of the species, that it was able to survive such a unique environmental occurrence, and then continue thriving to be this absolutely perfect specimen of an elm. This is a great idea of the shape of the canopy of a mature American elm too. This is, I absolutely love their up and out umbrella shaped canopy. It's a great shade providing tree for a front yard if you're really looking for something that was going to be there long term. But American elms are just absolutely fabulous trees. Again, support a wealth of wildlife. The birds in these images, hummingbird, bluebird, common yellowthroat, these are all birds that I have observed on different species of elms in our native forest. This is all right down the street from my house. I have seen them all on the elms, eating flowers off of the elms, eating insects that are occurring on the elms. And then here's the image of the seed that the elm produces. And again, I've seen them going after the seeds as well. Now this is, and I kind of intentionally did this. I organized this with the exception of the sycamore fruit and the acorn. I switched those around because I feel very adamant that oak should have been the one to kick off this whole presentation. But I intentionally quasi-organized this with regards to the size of the fruit that the trees produce. Because I think it's very important to consider the size of the fruit that's being produced and which, wildlife benefit from it. And then a diversity of fruit is very important. Real quick, going back to elm. Elm is, because I'm trying to keep up with this here, 213 species of moths and butterflies Doug Tallamy had observed benefiting from this tree. 200 different species of moths and butterflies, 213 different species. That is absolutely incredible. And again, going back to your native oaks, 534, over twice as many species. Tilia. So Tilia is your American linden or basswood. While we're on the Lepidoptera species topic, basswood, it was 150 different species of Lepidoptera were observed benefiting from basswood. So basswood is another one. Basswood is another that's very durable in an urban environment. Pollution tolerance is incredible. I mean, literally, you can see some of these trees. There are very mature specimen on the streets of DC that are no different than the willow oaks you see down there that have, all but engulfed the sidewalks and the curbs, grown over them, and are still thriving, showing no signs of missing a beat. I show the image of the bees on the flowers here. Tilia in general is known for its benefit to bees. The nectar, the pollen that the bees pull from the flowers produces a very sought after medicinal grade honey. And then again, you see the size of the fruit there in the image. So, basswood is one that we've seen a lot of interest in this tree over the past 5-7 years, a great increase in interest. The counties have been really increasing the demand for this tree, and I think it's only a matter of time before that follows suit in ornamental urban landscapes. Acer. So Acer is going to cover obviously a wide variety of species. Acer refers to maple. That's a sugar maple image there. These are red maple and sugar maple. Here, the one that's more orange with sugar maple above is the sugar, and the red is the red. And so here's the image beneath the trees is an image of the flowers. Those are red maple flowers. So I always tell people, when somebody comes looking for an ornamental spring bloomer, there's a lot of trees that we know very well are your ornamental spring blooming trees, dogwoods, redbuds, fringe trees, serviceberries. I don't think maple gets the attention that it deserves for being a spring blooming tree. Now, if you've seen sugar maples bloom, it's a more chartreuse green color flower, but it's the same flower structure as the red maple. But the red maple, I always tell people, it's not just called a red maple because of its fall color production. In fact, if you see native seedling red maples often on the woodline, they don't always produce a red fall color. Sometimes you get some pretty good seedling variation. Sometimes you have red maples that produce a very yellow fall color, but they almost always reliably produce that red spring bloom, and that's before the leaves come out. So what it does is, again, it's not an in-your-face, big 2-3 inch diameter flower like what we're used to with the dogwoods. But overall, if you look at the entire tree or the woodline when the red maple's going to bloom, it gives this really pretty red cast to all of the trees. And when you've got one as a standalone specimen in a front yard and they start blooming, all of a sudden you have this tree that's covered in these small red blooms and the whole tree looks red. I think it's absolutely stunning. So I sometimes get a little bit of an odd look when I do when I've done our spring blooming trees presentations in the past. I've certainly gotten some odd looks from people when I include red maple, but I'm very adamant that red maple should be grouped in with the spring flowering trees. It's an absolutely fabulous ornamental addition to a landscape. And then similarly, here you have a squirrel, enjoying the samaras. I have a sugar maple in the yard next to mine. Actually, these two, the red and the sugar maple, this is in my neighborhood, taken a block away from my house. And I thought it was a great comparison when they went into fall color together. But I have a sugar maple, very comparable to the one in the image here, in my next door neighbor's front yard. And every year I'm watching the squirrels hitting that tree hot and heavy when they go to seed, and they pull those samaras off, and they are absolutely a delectable food source for the wildlife. Squirrels enjoy them. The local rabbit population enjoys them. And I think that's something that we often overlook. You don't consider that any seed that's produced by a native tree is a high protein food source and fat as well. You know, these are fatty, high protein foods that the wildlife is benefiting from that's going to help them through the wintertime. River birch. So this is one that's very close to my heart. And probably many of you, you know, I grew up trouncing along through the woods along the riverside, and you know, up behind my house was birch bark court, and I always just remember as a kid, every time I'd be in the woods and I'd be along the river, seeing the river birch and the exfoliating bark, and I just remember very clearly associating the court that was next to the one I grew up on being named birch bark, and knowing every time I saw birch bark court that this is what it was in reference to. And it wasn't until I was older that I started to really see the benefit of this tree. You know, birch is something that we know that, again, it's called river birch, that thrives in wet soils, anaerobic environments, compact soils. And they grow incredibly fast, which is great if you're trying to get coverage. But it wasn't until I started seeing these river birch in areas that were also extremely dry, compacted, poor soils, also thriving just the same. Now, again, if you were planting a new tree, you would certainly need to make sure you're watering it thoroughly to get established. But once established, you know, this is a tree that is going to thrive in a whole bunch of diverse ecosystems. I've seen every insect that I know go to the flowers on this tree when they go into spring blooming before the leaves come out. Again, I think a lot of people are familiar with the blooming from oaks and birches, et cetera, as a nuisance because of spring allergies. But, you know, in fact, this is a major part of our ecosystem and a major beneficial part of the local ecology. You're getting everything that's going to those flowers. I've observed numerous species, again, of birds, and this is going to sound crazy unless you've observed it yourself and you're familiar. I've observed birds that year after year, I believe, are the same migratory species that are coming through the area that will stop in at the same trees year after year after year because they know this is a reliable source of food. And it almost always is when the birch are in flower, but really right at the tail end of their flowering, I start to see the same warbler species that are migrating through the area coming back. And when I see it, I can't help but wonder, is it actually the same birds? Which I think a lot of times it is. It absolutely is. You know, birch, again, you see the multi-stem image here. Birch are single stem, multi-stem. If you're ever in Great Falls National Park, right by the main office there in the picnic area, I think there are some birch that people don't acknowledge as birch because they are so big and so massive and they're single trunk trees, you know, that you don't even realize they're river birch until you look up into the upper portions of the canopy and are able to identify that exfoliating birch bark that we're so familiar with. But, you know, these are just absolutely invaluable trees to our local ecology. So next I want to talk about, you know, the underlying canopy trees. And every, you know, just to put it out there, every healthy forest ecosystem, you know, needs multiple generations coming on, no different than we do. You know, so you've got your overstory mature canopy trees. Well, those trees are obviously dropping seeds. Some are going to wildlife, some are going to the forest floor and sprouting and have the next generation coming up. So in a healthy forest ecosystem, you're always going to have new generations of mature, new generations of the overstory canopy trees coming up, also providing that understory canopy. But then you've got your smaller tree species, such as Carpinus, Hornbeam. So again, this just going back real quickly, this initial image, this is a rare visitor to our area. It's the yellow-crowned night heron. This is an American hornbeam that is, you know, I would say 30% of the forest species behind the bog that's near my house in the park by my house. And this seemed to be the tree of choice for these birds when they were there the year that they came and were reproducing there. Now, this is one of the parents that returns and lays eggs in our area every year. But again, it was very interesting to me to see that not only did the parents tend to go to this tree, but so did the babies once the babies had hatched. And that's where they sat above the bog and perched, and it's a whole, wood line of them. So again, here's an image very similar to your birch, an image of the flowering in the spring. And then here are the seeds in the fall, and you can see the actual seed heads there with the bracts behind them. But so again, now we've decreased a little bit in size, but look at how many seeds there are. Instead of just having one sweet gum ball or one sycamore fruit or acorn, you've got a series of them. So in collective, that one petiole has now produced several seeds, which again, birds could enjoy those, or one bird could enjoy all of those and get the same benefit out of that as it would out of an acorn. I've certainly seen squirrels going after hornbeam fruit as well. For those of you, before we move on to redwood, for those of you that are not familiar with hornbeam, this is also, we know it as ironwood. This is the one, it's got a very smooth, impressive gray bark, really ripped like a muscle. I mean, it's got this very impressive textured wood. A great, durable, small ornamental tree. I can't say enough for the impressive ornamental characteristics out of this tree when it flowers. And then it just, a lot of our native trees, we've seen some problems come and go in terms of pathogens or insects. Hornbeam is one that I think is commonly overlooked. And really, there aren't very many insects or pathogens that have affected this tree over the years that I've been doing this. It's an incredibly durable tree. It's a beautiful structure. I think it could very easily in the landscape be, in the winter landscape, be confused for a Japanese maple because it has such an impressive structure. And I think it's a great small tree for an ornamental landscape. So redbud, again, just going back to the impressive flowering, if you're from this area or if you've been here for any length of time, we all look forward to this scene in the spring. It is the sole indicator that it's around the corner. I just love driving the country roads in this area, heading a little bit west and seeing just the woodlands lined with sprigs of redbud flowers. And, it's a real sign that spring is getting ready to kick off. And I just absolutely love that. And then the leaves, again, it's a beautiful shade of green, really big, impressive heart-shaped leaf, which to me is a great texture. I'm a big texture fanatic when it comes to ornamental landscaping. This image doesn't really do it justice, but when you see one of these trees in the landscape, the way those leaves are almost stacked and the stems zigzag a little bit, which is a defining characteristic of the tree, the softwood stems, you can see this kind of zigzag pattern from bud to bud. It's a very neat look in the winter landscape, but the foliage on the tree is spectacular. And then again, here's the seed that's produced for the wildlife. I can't say enough for what seeds do to benefit the wildlife in this area, protein, fat, etc. But this is a really, really great source. So serviceberry or Juneberry, shadblow, whatever you prefer to call it, there are a number of different species of serviceberry that are native locally to this region. And we could talk all day long about the differences between each species. The bottom line is this is a species similar to the redbud. It is in flower very early in the spring. This is an early source for nectar for honeybees. When we have warm days in the spring and these trees are in bloom, I do observe bees going to them when all of a sudden their metabolic activity increases a little bit with the temperature increase. And that's something that is so imperative that we have multiple varieties of species, whether shrubs or trees, that are in bloom during warm days in the fall, in the winter, in the spring, when bees and other insects are active because we have a warm day here or there. They're, as soon as we have some warm days, their metabolic activity increases and they're active. Well, they are in need of food right then and there. And if there's nothing in bloom and they don't get it, that's a very difficult situation, especially if we then go back to cold the next day or two later. You know, they really are expelling a lot of resources when they're active like that. They need to be able to refuel. So Serviceberry is a great tree for that. And then, you know, the fruit come in June time, which is one of the reasons why they're called June berries, obviously. For those of you that haven't enjoyed the fruit from a Serviceberry, it's very comparable to a blueberry. Some might even tell you it's better. They're fabulous, very high seed content in them, which again is a great source of protein in addition to the fruit. But this is a favorite amongst all of the local wildlife, including the humans trouncing through the woods. But if you're looking for bird attraction, this is definitely one of the top 5. I mean, you can't plant another tree that's going to get you bird attraction as well as the Serviceberry will. And I think I'm going to eat those words in just a second here, but we'll get there in a minute. Sweet Bay Magnolia. Sweet Bay is one of my favorites, Magnolia Virginiana. I think, you know, the southern magnolia is technically native to the East Coast, and we're on the very northern edge of its range. That's Magnolia grandiflora. But Sweet Bay is absolutely locally native here, again, named after Virginia, Magnolia Virginiana. I have seen numerous seedling Sweet Bays growing in the woods in this area, east of this area. There are a lot of native local Sweet Bays in, like, you know, along the GW Parkway and those forest systems over there along the river. Sweet Bay is a fabulous plant. It's a native kind of woodland creek bank plant, you know, really appreciates wet feet. Again, will tolerate an incredibly dry, poor quality compacted soil as well. I don't encourage anybody to leave a soil poor quality, but gosh, if you've got to get a species in there while you're working on the soil year after year, what better one than your native Sweet Bay Magnolia if it's going to tolerate that, and then you can continue to top dress and feed that soil year after year. You know, I think a lot of times what I've noticed is it's some of the species that'll appreciate wetter, more anaerobic soils that will also tolerate poor, dry, compacted soils. And I think it's their tolerance for the anaerobic condition that allows them to thrive in those types of situations. I could be wrong there, but that's my hypothesis. You know, Sweet Bay, you can see the flowers, again, great nectar source. When they're in bloom, they're very fragrant, enjoyable for, you know, us. If you had an outdoor living area, a patio or something, this would be a great patio tree. They are semi-evergreen to evergreen. On a very, very hard winter, you'll get some of those leaves will drop, if not all of them. And on a normal winter to a mild winter, you'll have them remain, you know, 60 to 70% evergreen. So a lot of times this is where I don't need a huge tree, you know, a big evergreen screen, so to speak. But I do need something that's going to be in a 10 to 15 foot tall range for evergreen screening around a, you know, an outdoor living space. And I know I've got poor soils, or I know I've got a wet soil environment. This is a great choice for that. You know, it's a great alternative to like a skip laurel, for instance, in an ornamental landscape where you really like that broad, glossy leafed appearance. That's a very attractive look in an ornamental landscape. But the truth is sometimes you've got a soil condition that certain species won't tolerate, and Sweet Bay likely will. You know, again, I can't say enough for the bloom, fragrance, and then you'll notice the insects will appreciate it just the same. I've got, you know, dozens of pictures of thousands of different insects on those flowers at the same time, and then they go to seed. And again, you've got a seed that's beneficial to the wildlife. So here's where I mentioned I was going to eat my words. So I mentioned that you weren't going to get much better attraction for local wildlife and birds than from the Serviceberry. So I think this is a sleeper, in my opinion. And again, I could talk all day long about all of the different species of native trees, and it was a fight internally for me to really narrow this one down and be selective about what I chose to speak to you all about. And again, afterwards, I'm very easy to get a hold of. I'm happy to talk with anybody at length about all of the other species that we didn't touch on today, but this is one I might catch a little bit of flack from my colleagues on. You know, the viburnums we typically categorize as shrubs, and I think that certainly that's realistic, and that gives people a realistic size expectation. But Blackhaw specifically is one of the species of viburnums that I tend to use quite often in landscaping as a small ornamental specimen tree. You know, again, this is not any different in maturity size-wise than some of the smaller, mature Japanese maples. Viburnum, you know, is in the honeysuckle family, and it has an opposite leaf arrangement for those of you that are into taxonomy, which so do Japanese maples. And one of the things that is really neat about them is they're so impressive structurally that, again, in the wintertime, this is a tree that could often be confused for a specimen Japanese maple in a landscape if you used it as such. Blackhaw Viburnum has a great structure on its own without any intervention from us. And then right around, you know, the end of December, Christmas time, it's already gone to fruit in the fall. Fruit sets, fall color is immaculate on these trees. Fall color is a you know, beautiful red, similar to that of the black gum. It's a kind of crimson scarletish red. And then after those leaves fall, this is the fruit that's left behind. And the fruit, what I notice is it's as it's ripe like this, it gets a little bit of bird activity. And then when it is a little overly ripe, I'm going to say when your banana is starting to really freckle up, when the fruit just start to get past peak ripeness and start to wrinkle, all of a sudden you are talking eruptions of cedar waxwings, and every other bird that's still here at that time is hitting these trees hot and heavy. I first noticed this phenomenon, again, up at Great Falls National Park, in the area by the visitor center, between the river trail and the canal and the main parking lots. All of those woodlands there, the vast majority of the undergrowth species is Blackhaw Viburnum. That's where this image was taken. There must have been thousands upon thousands of cedar waxwings going back and forth from the upper, you know, overstory canopy trees to the understory Blackhaw Viburnums, and it was just a complete feast. And it was something that I'll never forget the first time I went there and saw it. And then again, year after year since then, when my family visits around that time of year, when they are all on winter break from school, we go up there and we all enjoy watching it. And it's absolutely fabulous to see that year after year, these plants provide that sort of benefit to the wildlife. So moving on from the overstory and understory deciduous trees, you know, and again, I grouped sweet bay in there with the deciduous. I do think of it as semi-evergreen to semi-deciduous. There are a lot of great evergreen species that are native here as well. And I you know, really wanted to make sure we talked about a few of them. I think evergreen screening, you know, especially with development and homes as close as they are, you know, it's a very hot topic, and I think sometimes we get a little tunnel vision as to what species we can use. You know, we all know the damaging effects from creating monoculture. So it's important to keep things diverse. There are a lot of great species that I think are native to the United States that we use as evergreen screens, but there are also a lot of great species that are native to the local area, to Virginia specifically, that we often don't consider. Some we do, but some we could very easily work in with those other evergreens to make a great evergreen screen on the property. And again, it's not always about screening. I think, you know, here you've got a little mix of evergreens. You can see some snowfall on the holly. You can see some white pine needles here. You know, this is a great place for winter wildlife to call home, to seek shelter from winter storms. You know, the warmth in the evergreen forest in the wintertime, you know, you're talking about at least a 10, 15 degree temperature fluctuation from standing out in the open in the cold and the wind to popping into an evergreen forest. If you've ever been camping in the wintertime when there's snow on the ground and you're out where the wind is whistling and it's cold, you pop into the forest where you're going to set camp, and there is a noticeable increase in temperature. So first one is holly, American holly. Again, the flowering, I think a lot of these species, evergreens specifically, we don't necessarily acknowledge the fact that they're still flowering trees. So the flowers, again, are nothing to write home about. This is not a dogwood bloom. It's not a redbud or a serviceberry in bloom that's really going to knock your socks off. They're discreet. They're botanically quite interesting and absolutely fantastic, but these are nectar sources. This is a food mechanism for a lot of different pollinators. And then when you get that pollination, you're going to get a fruit set on your hollies. And again, there's so many different species. Here I chose an image of a robin, and this similarly, what's really neat about the hollies is how long that fruit will persist on the plant. A serviceberry in June, those fruits are relatively quick to disappear. Birds, like I said, they are a delectable food source for most of your native wildlife. I've seen raccoons eating them, squirrels, birds, you name it. But birds are very quick to dive bomb serviceberries when they're in bloom. I've seen hollies fruit persist, from late summer when the fruit just shows its first sign of ripening, all the way through, I'm going to say early March, when all of a sudden you've got, robins we certainly have here in the wintertime, but I don't think people realize they certainly are a semi-migratory species. So all of a sudden in the spring, when we have the robins coming back really hot and heavy, the wood line here we have on the Fair Oaks store is absolutely a beautiful ecosystem. That's where this image was taken. But you'll notice as soon as the migratory robins really come back, the first thing that they go to is all of those ripened American holly fruits, and they just seek and destroy those hollies before they go on to the next species of food source, as do so many species. Eastern red cedar, again, here's your namesake, your cedar waxwing, enjoying some of the female cones. We call those juniper berries. I would be completely remiss if I didn't say that botanically correctly. They are in fact female cones. I'm going to, for the sake of not causing confusion for the rest of the time we refer to them, I'll call them juniper berries. But that female cone, those juniper berries, that's a great food source. Again, for a lot of wildlife, it's not just cedar waxwings. You name any of our common species in this area, and I've seen them enjoying the juniper berries. And then these are the male cones in the image above. That's the gold cone. So they are Eastern red cedar is a dioecious plant, which means two houses. It means there are male and female plants, and you will get a variety of male plants that will produce the gold cone effect, which is absolutely stunning when they go into cone. Really produces, all of the tips of the branches start to have a little bit of that gold coloration to them, and they just glow. It's absolutely stunning. Similarly, the female plants will produce the juniper berries, and that's equally as beautiful in its own. And then you're going to get the wildlife attraction. And again, Eastern red cedar, if you see Eastern red cedar forests, this is a great environment for our local ecology. You get these mass stands of Eastern red cedar forest. There's a lot out in my area, Cub Run, Bull Run. Those are known areas, the Manassas battlefields. You have a lot of our local wildlife that's overwintering in those types of forests. And it's absolutely one of the most durable plants that we sell. A very good small-sized evergreen in maturity. Long term, they can get a little bit bigger, but this is what I would call a small to medium evergreen tree. Incredibly drought tolerant. You can see this is obviously a meadow environment where this one is pictured here. They do typically like to be in that upland kind of meadow environment. Very drought tolerant. They were first planted ornamentally, hundreds of years ago when farmers needed a windbreak in front of their structures, barns. And that's what Eastern red cedars were first known for and cultivated for. Now today, we've got a lot of different cultivars of them. We've got some shrub form cultivars of them. We've got some columnar cultivars of them that are very Italian cypress-esque in their appearance. So this is a tree that we have really seen now cultivated to meet the needs of ornamental landscaping, and which is absolutely thrilling considering it's a native and its benefits to the local ecology. Pines. So I'm a big pine fanatic. I think there's always a place in the landscape for pine. Again, going back to my obsession with textures, you can't ask for a softer texture than our long needle leaf pines that are native here. And here is your eastern white pine on the right, and then on the other side is your loblolly pine. Eastern white pines, for those of you that are familiar with them and have mature stands of them or know where there are, this is one of our most priceless evergreens in this area. Again, the pine cones, I've seen a number of different species pulling off of those pine cones. It's not just the individual scales on the pine cone are called strobilus or strobili. I've seen a number of different species that have picked pine cones apart and have eaten the strobili. I've seen a number of different species that have gone to the pine cones and are simply feeding off of the sugar that's produced by the trees. We forget that trees, again, in the process of photosynthesis, produce a lot of sugar. That's what they're feeding off of. They're producing sugars for themselves. That's their food. And in that process, they will emit a good bit of that sugar in the form of sap. So that sap that's running down that pine cone, that white crustiness, that's just sugar that's crystallized on that pine cone. I've seen so many species of insect feeding on that sugar, and that's true for a lot of trees. And then loblolly pines, again, a little bit longer needled than the eastern white pine, is an incredibly fast grower. I don't think people realize that pines are a great choice if you're looking for something that's a fast growing tree. Loblolly certainly is that. Very straight trunked, very upright, impressive long soft needle texture, and again, produces a great cone, lots of sugar, absolutely fabulous food source for wildlife. So I grouped taxodium in here, bald cypress. Again, not an evergreen, which is why they call it a bald cypress. But bald cypress is another one I just can't say enough for. Again, it's got a great cone to it. It is a conifer, not technically a pine. You see here bald cypress growing in the swamp. Similarly, they can grow in incredibly dry areas as well. I know there's a stand of them on 28 before you get down into Nokesville by the 234 bypass. It is a median tree in between the lanes of 28, and they are absolutely thriving. It is a brilliant planting. I would have never thought to have used bald cypress there. Great texture. Again, it's a crummy soil environment, which I suspect they tolerate because of their tolerance of anaerobic soils. And again, here is a mature, thriving ecosystem, stand of bald cypress in a swamp, completely underwater. We're all familiar with cypress knees, or you've seen them before in the past. Again, that's something it takes quite a while for these trees to produce, but I just can't say enough for this tree as an option for a native in a poor soil environment or a wet soil. And then the other thing that I think is a little bit of a sleeper on these trees is their fall color. We look up into the surrounding forests and we can enjoy yellows and reds and oranges and some of the more burnt tones, but bald cypress go into a completely unique, different fall color than what a lot of our broadleaf deciduous trees do. It's copper, almost like a penny. And I think that's a great way to get some contrasting fall color. It's a needle leaf texture. Great way to get some contrasting texture and color in both the spring and summer and the fall landscape. So that concludes my rattling off benefits of particular species. thank you all very much for joining me. You know, again, I can't tell you all how much I love our native ecosystem here, and how happy I am to be able to discuss that with you, and continue to help guide people towards what species will be appropriate for their needs. I would be thrilled if anyone has any questions or needs to, you know, select plants to help them. If they want to reach out to me, talk natives, it is absolutely something I'm passionate about, and I'm very familiar with. So thank you all very much, and please feel free, reach out to me here at the Fair Oaks location anytime you need to.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Michael. If you're all right, we will stay on for a little bit and answer questions and take some questions for anybody who needs to go. We are recording this and we'll be distributing it tomorrow along with a coupon by email. So keep an eye out for that. And if you need to leave and you want to catch the questions, you can always do that later. So Michael, if you're good, we'll stay on for a few more minutes.
I would love to. In fact, I kind of pulled up the Q&A box here. Are you okay if I start?
Yeah. Oh yeah, go for it.
So the first one I wanted to address is and I'm going to go out of order here, so everybody forgive me. Mistletoe, and I'll try to do it in order since I just said that. Mistletoe into the tree next to the black yes, quite possibly. If you're referring to the picture that I used, there is mistletoe in the maple next to the black and there's mistletoe in many trees. For those of you who know mistletoe, for its purpose around the holidays, mistletoe is a semi-parasitic plant that will grow into the branches, and you benefit from the photosynthesis of our native trees. Often you'll find it in red maples. I didn't catch it in that image, so good eye. If it is there, yes, it's very possible. And I know there is some mistletoe in the surrounding trees on the property here, so it's probable. 10, 14-foot native tree bloom in spring to plant in place of a weeping cherry. Yes, absolutely there is. Bacterial gamosis is typically not transferable from a cherry to another tree. There are a lot of options. I would tell you fringe trees, serviceberries, redbuds. If you want to know some more options, I'd encourage you to come into any one of our 3 locations, whichever is closest and most convenient for you. And don't forget to grab your Go Native sticker when you're here. We've got a lot of fabulous plant experts that are thrilled to recommend and work with you on what native species is going to work best for that area. But typically the gamosis issue with your cherry is unique to cherries. What would I recommend in terms of a tough, preferably native tree to put in a parking lot island 20 by 10 without a lot of sun given other nearby trees? There are a lot of species. So one of the things that I always like to bring to light is, you know, we commonly will have a misconception about sun exposure and what is a lot of light or not a lot of light. You know, trees don't always need direct sun all day. You know, when we talk about full sun is sun up till sundown, direct sun. There is something to be said for a little bit of direct sun exposure and a lot of indirect light. That's a great environment for just about anything. So yes, there are a lot of species. I would reference the ones that I mentioned are higher tolerance of pollution or urban environments. You know, your sweet gums, again, if you're in a parking area, you've got to consider seed drop. So potentially basswood, American linden, you know, elms, things like that are going to drop a smaller seed, not, you know, be destroying people's cars with an acorn falling 50 feet. And then, you know, in terms of the mature size, I think, you know, you have to consider we have a life expectancy for urban trees planted in poor environments. So that's something you have to set yourself up for success by providing realistic expectations in terms of longevity of these tree species. Paula, I'm so thrilled to see a comment from you. I can't tell you how much I love that you're here right now. We have many lindens in our community which attract aphids. I understand that some pesticides have been disapproved because of their effects on bees. However, aphids drop in gooey mixture. Yes. So Paula, it's not lindens that are attracting the aphids specifically. It's anything. Aphids are a normal insect in any ecosystem. And I always tell people, your goal is not to eradicate insect populations, even the harmful insect populations, but to create a healthy environment. In the industry, we call it plant health care. You create a healthy environment, healthy trees, healthy soil, so the trees have everything they need so they can ward off these harmful pests. And you've got biological control from beneficial native insects that are keeping those harmful pest infestations at bay. So I agree, you don't want to be using systemic pesticides that are going to last in the tree species for any extreme length of time. When those trees are liable to go into flower while those systemic insecticides are still effective in the tree, because you're right, then you're having beneficial insects that are feeding on those trees and are experiencing the negative impact from using harmful systemic insecticides. So, but that goes so much deeper than just a treatment right now. That's something you work on year after year. That's why I mentioned planting something like a sweet bay, or something that will tolerate a poor soil environment while you're working on those soils, trying to improve the quality of them, so those trees have everything they need to be able to thrive and ward off harmful insect infestations. Should the redbud deadwood be trimmed in the fall? Deadwood is a very gray area term in the industry. So deadwood, you'd have to consider the entire inside of your tree beyond the cambium layer as dead wood. So really, we want to talk about dead branches. Dead branches, if they are truly dead, yeah, can be removed at any time. You certainly don't want hangers in your tree that are likely to fall off and damage something or somebody. Don't get many flowers on my sweet bay. What type of fertilizer might help? Come into our plant clinic and speak to our plant specialists about that. And the reason I say that is because there are a number of different fertilizers, but there are also a number of different things that you could be doing to improve your overall soil profile that could potentially help and encourage that tree to flower more prolific long-term. Blackhaw Viburnum has lots of suckers coming up. Can we stop them? Prune them. If it's suckering, it's possible there's a number of reasons, but continue to prune them off as the tree matures. I would imagine it may lessen. Any small 12 feet, approximately evergreens that will grow in shade under crepes for screening. Yes, there are several great options. Come visit us at the stores, and we've got some great options for you. I don't want to get too much into the specific plant recommendations for people's individual needs, but yes, absolutely, there's some fabulous options there. Red oaks in our development, Reston, Virginia, are dying, and so many have been taken down. Arborists here are saying the diseases affecting them is continuing to be a problem, is just affecting. So this is a hot topic right now. And I could talk till I'm blue in the face on this, as well as everything else, if you can't tell already about me. Number one, it's not just the red oaks, okay? So in Reston, as well as up into McLean, Great Falls, there is a very unique, and this is, again, not anything that has been had anyone do a long-term or proven study on, but myself and a few other local trusted arborists that I confide in and really trust their opinions and their education. We've kind of chatted about this possibility for a little while, and I think we've come up with a hypothesis that we'll have to at some point get somebody to really check us out and see if we're right on this. But Reston specifically is losing a lot of chestnut oaks. And I'm not saying that you're not losing some red oaks. There's some red oaks going, some white oaks are going. This is not unique to Reston, but the chestnut oaks, chestnut oak is more of a mountain species of oak. So I'm going back to your comment here. You mentioned red oaks are having some trouble and being taken down. Not every oak that's coming down in the Reston and north of Reston area are red oaks. Many of them, in fact, I've heard from some of the folks that are doing work up in that area that it may be as many as 60% have been chestnut oaks. Now, chestnut oaks, being a mountain species of oak, seemed to, and again, this is speculation, I believe they may have followed, because oaks are very promiscuous and they will reseed very freely. If you notice, your squirrels or your best farmers will take acorns and seed them all over the place, and all of a sudden you got 500 oaks popping up in your garden in the springtime. So similarly, the chestnut oaks I've noticed really seem to follow this seam of rock from the Blue Ridge, kind of along the Potomac River, all the way out through Reston and Great Falls and McLean, and kind of stop there along the GW Parkway. Now, my belief is that they have, over the course of thousands of years, possibly come down from the mountains and really, even at cooler times, have established themselves in this area. You're talking these trees that are coming down in the northern parts of Northern Virginia. The trees that are coming down are at most 100 years old. These are not trees that have been there for thousands of years. So, and as our climate changes, it becomes a little bit inhospitable towards some of these species that may have seeded themselves there at a time when our climate and temperatures were more hospitable. Now all of a sudden we're changing. We're getting more summer rain. It's a little bit less friendly for some of the oak species, such as chestnut oaks, which really want to be on a very well sloped draining environment. So I don't know that. Again, that's a hypothesis. I don't know that I write off oaks in general for your area. I think it's a great tree. I think there's a lot of great trees. Red oaks, certainly we're experiencing bacterial leaf scorch, and that's not something that's gone away. But, I've spoken with many experts, one of which, if you all have attended any of his presentations, Keith Tomlinson, has been in this area and been in this industry for over 30 years. He's one of the most brilliant minds in horticulture. And Keith's side passion, I always kind of jokingly say, is Sally, if I click, I can get out of the, can I get back to where I'm just speaking here and I'm out of my slideshow?
You can just stop
share
screen. Yeah.
Thanks. All right, now I feel like you all can see me and know that I'm here. Keith Tomlinson is one of the most brilliant minds in horticulture, in my opinion, and his side passion is paleobotany, which is really interesting. It's a world not many of us know much about, but one of the things he references is the northern red oaks specifically. So there are fossil remains of northern red oaks that have been identified as far south as northern Florida, but it was at a time where the glacial movement had really dipped further south. And then as the glacial movement receded back up into the north, so did the species of northern red oaks and the fossilized remains from those eras. So, when we talk about things like bacterial leaf scorch that are affecting our northern red oaks, well, it's called northern red oak. Is it supposed to be here in the future? I don't know. As our climate changes and our temperatures increase, it's quite possible that species may cease to exist in North Carolina and Southern Virginia, and maybe at some point Northern Virginia, but maybe it exists and thrives up here despite the presence of bacterial leaf scorch, because this has now become the ideal environment for that species. So there was another issue called oak decline, and I was at an industry event this summer where one of the leading arborists and authorities on the subject of tree pathology spoke very adamantly that now is the time to be planting more oaks, because what we've seen is there have been oaks that have been affected by this generic oak decline that we've referred to, but the oaks that have not been affected, and they've continued to thrive. In fact, many of the oaks that have been newly planted have continued their vigor and health and have shown no signs of being affected by oak decline, which is some of the most optimistic news I've ever heard. And it's just thrilling to think that, we're not going to lose all the oaks. They're not going to be next, right? So, but Bill was very adamant that now is the time for us to be planting more oaks than ever, because the new generations that are coming on are thriving and doing fabulously. So I hope that touched on that a little bit, because I was really excited to get to that comment. And I'd be happy to talk to you more about that at any time. I got a lot of strong opinions on oaks that comes from a certain professor and mentor that was oak crazy. Redbud sturdy enough for a winter snow, a wet snow in winter. Sure, until it's not, right? So there's the answer of the day. Everything is sturdy enough to support the heavy winter wet snow until it's not. like I said, you know, in Snowmageddon and Snowpocalypse 2010 and 2015, every hardwooded tree in the forest was, you know, had long branches that were top heavy, that were breaking, with the exception of our glorious black gum here that I know of. Will sweet bay grow in areas that have black walnut trees? I believe so, but you can look up juglans tolerance. I have to admit, when I answer that question, the first thing I do is, I believe it's the PSU, Penn State University website, has a great juglans tolerance list. The first thing I do is Google juglans tolerance species. And juglone is the chemical that black walnuts produce, for those of you who are not familiar with it. It is an allelopathic chemical, meaning it inhibits the growth of other certain plants surrounding it. Grass is one of those typically, but a lot of times the species that will thrive in those environments with the juglone presence is are native species, in fact. So I don't know that 100%. Google that, and I always Google juglones tolerant species.edu. Anytime you want to get something credible, add the .edu on the end of the Google search, and you'll get a better result, or at least a more reliable resource. Great presentation. Thank you, Sylvia. Love you very much for that. Thank you. Great presentation, wonderful pictures. Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. Could Michael briefly talk about what non-native trees should be avoided? No, I'm not going to talk about that, Beth. And I'm sorry. I know you also. I'm excited that you're here. You know, I have learned that no matter what I say, I'm going to upset somebody if I talk about you know, non-native trees that should be avoided. You know, the only thing I'll say is it's very important to be aware of. It's very important to be aware of all characteristics of any species. You know what you're getting into when you're planting stuff. So, you know, some things are tolerable, some things are completely intolerable. And if you're planting something that is known to be a very free reseeding plant, and it's something that's extremely invasive, and you have no intentions to attempt to control it, then I think that's something to avoid. But no, I don't want to get into that one too much. I'm here to talk about positivity only today. Thank you for being here. Thank you for presentation. Thank you very much for being here. I appreciate it. Big mulch bed in backyard. I need to replace Korean dogwood. What native tree would you use? I don't want to tell you what I'd use, because what I like and what you like could be two different things, and I'm very opinionated. Come into one of our 3 locations, whichever one's conveniently located closest to you. Grab your Go Native sticker and get with one of our tree and shrub specialists, and they'd be thrilled to help you pick out a native tree to replace your Korean dogwood. Circle area of land surrounded by asphalt driveway in front of house, which stays very wet. Also fountain that tends to throw water. Best idea for tree: bald cypress, river birch, sweet bay, depending on the size you're interested in putting in. Absolutely, I love all of those. Bald cypress, river birch. Couldn't have said it better myself. Sycamore. Sycamore is a great, big, rounded canopy, majestic presence, beautiful bark for a fourth season of interest. Yes, you're headed in the right direction. Absolutely. 20-year-old maple tree roots popping out of the ground. What should I do? Mulch around that area. Make sure you're not running a lawnmower over them, and eliminate as much turf competition from that area as possible. When I say mulch up over them, no more than 2 to 4 inches depth. Those tree roots are established near the surface of the soil because that's where there's oxygen present, and tree roots need oxygen exchange just as much as they need water and nutrients. So they are there for a reason. It's this balance between what the tree needs and what we need ornamentally speaking. But the best thing you could do to make them not a nuisance for you is to increase the width of your mulch bed and eliminate the turf that might need to be mowed there otherwise. Thank you very much for your kind comments, Sylvia. I appreciate that. Pat, good. I'm glad the Oaks worked out. John and Barbara, I am so thrilled that you're here. Love you guys. Can't wait to see you sporting your native tree sticker. Love it. And Pat, yes, I'm happy to talk about oaks any day. And I again, you know, we're talking again just real quickly, and before I let you all go, I know I could speak forever, and I'm sure some people are tired of hearing me at this point, but I always say, and actually I don't, I think there was an article in the Post last year sometime, I saved it, somebody gave me, you know, every person I know saved me a copy, but you know, and it made a reference to there's why every small garden space needs an oak. So I want to elaborate on that because I agree with it, but not only does every small garden space or every garden or every property need an oak, but there's an oak for every application. There's an oak for everybody. So whereas I am going to appreciate the most, you know, majestic, wide-spreading field oak out there, whether it be a white oak or a bur oak or a post oak, you know, someone else might like the more delicate foliage of a willow oak, you know, and it's kind of, you know, more live oak appearance, or someone else may like the really, you know, dramatic height and, you know, umbrella shaped spread of a narrow or southern red oak. And oaks are so versatile in their structure and their habits and what they bring to the table as far as wildlife benefit. Somebody else mentioned a birch. I didn't mention when we got to the birch slide, 400 plus species of Lepidoptera that birch benefit. That's second only to the oaks, and they're 534. So there's another reason to plant some birch. Anyway, like I said, I'm easy to get a hold of. I'm here just about every day, day and night. You can email me, call the store, get my email, my phone number, anything. I'm thrilled to help everybody with anything you all may need. Thank you so much for having me. Come get your stickers.
Michael, thank you so much. This is a great presentation. I learned a lot. And I know everybody else did too, but we are, just as a quick reminder, like I said, we're sending out the recording tomorrow for those of you who have asked for it. That'll go out with coupon as well. And like Michael said, stop and get your native, Go Native sticker. I think that's great. So Michael, thank you so much. And thank you everybody for coming to attend the class today.
Thanks, Sally. Thanks for asking me to do this. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, see you all later.
All right, see you guys.